Okay, so I see people are finishing up, and 3 people put stock A. So we can work through it and then we'll make our final decision and see if stock A is correct or not. So basically how you solve this is by using your CAPM equation. So we're going to start with stock A. So we'll have your risk-free rate is 2% plus a beta of 1.42, and then you multiply that by your market return or your market rate, which is 10%, minus your risk-free rate again, so that's 2%. So that's it typed out. Now, if you put it into an actual equation, you should get 13.36%. And then when you're looking at stock B, it's almost the same thing, but you just change the beta. So now you'll have 2% plus a beta of 0.75 times your 10% minus 2%. And so now if you put that in equation, wait, something's wrong. Oh, you should get 8%. So by doing that, you can see that stock A has a higher cost of capital. If you guys have any questions on this, just type it in the chat and I'll try and answer them. And so now it says, assume the risk-free rate is 4%. You're a financial advisor and your client has decided to invest in exactly one of 2 risky funds, A and B. She comes to you for advice. Whichever fund you recommend, she will combine it with the risk-free asset. Expected returns are A equal to 13% and B equal to 18%. Volatilities are a standard deviation of A equals 20% and a standard deviation of B equals 30%. Without knowing your client's tolerant risk, which fund would you recommend? So based on the numbers you have, think about the equation that you will be using and take a few minutes, solve it, and then when you're done, put your answer in the chat. Before I start doing it, can someone type in the chat the name of the equation that they used for this problem? Yeah, so it is the Sharpe ratio, so I'm glad you guys realized that. So when you see standard deviation, you know that's Sharpe ratio. It's not CAPM. We don't use standard deviation in that. So the way I set it up is just by listing A and B. And then for your equation, you're going to have A is 0.13 minus 0.04 divided by 0.2. And then when you do an equation, you should get 0.45. And then you do the same thing with B. So you're going to have 0.18 minus 0.04 divided by 0.3. So for this, you will get 0.47 and 0.45 problem. And so for here, we have stock A and stock B. I give you your market index and your risk-free rate. You have a forecast return and a standard deviation and a beta. You want to find your expected return and your Sharpe ratio. You have stock A and stock B. You have your forecasted returns for both, a standard deviation for both, and a beta for both. You also have your market index and your risk-free rate. So starting with stock A, we'll do one at a time. So this is going to be expected return. And then, so for this one, our equation is going to be using CAPM. So that's what your return is finding it with your CAPM equation. So that is basically just 3%, which is your risk-free rate, plus your beta of 2 times your market index or your market rate is 11%, minus your risk-free rate is 3%. So when you solve that, you should get 19%. And then continuing with stock A, if you want to find the Sharpe ratio, this is like the problem that we just did. You're using your standard deviation, your risk-free rate, and your beta. So for this, you're going to be taking 14 minus 3 divided by 30. So when you solve this, you should get 0.37 for your Sharpe ratio. And then if you do the same thing with B, for the expected return, which is your CAPM equation, you're doing 3% plus your beta is 0.5, and then the rest the same is 11% minus 3%. So when you solve that, you should get 7%. And then the same thing with B. For the Sharpe ratio, you're going to be doing 9 minus 3 divided by 40. And then when you solve that, you should get 0.15. So it says Chicago Corp stock will pay a dividend of $1.32 next year. Its current price is $24.625 per share. The beta for the stock is $1.35 or is 135, and the expected return on the market is 13.5%. If the risk-free rate is 8.2%, what is the expected growth rate of Chicago? For this problem, you're going to be using your CAPM, and it's the same equation as always. So the way that you're going to do it and solve it is you have your risk-free rate of 8.2%, and then you add in your beta of 1.35, and you multiply that by your return on market is 13.5%. And then you subtract out your risk-free rate again. So if you're going to solve this, it would end up being 15.36%. On Monday, I believe we will be talking about it in class. I will be doing 2 Monday, Tuesday SI sessions on the weighted average. But from what I can see, I think you guys have homework on this, so hopefully this helps, maybe for the quiz also. So for weighted average, basically what you have is you're going to be using a few equations. The first one we kind of already touched upon is cost a day. So that's your KD. Your KD is equal to your pre-tax yield, which is when you find, it's like your rate, your required rate, times 1 minus the given tax rate. And then for cost of equity, we already talked about this. Cost of equity is KE, and that's your CAPM formula. So that's why we're doing a lot of review, because it does play a part into the weighted average. So on Monday in the SI session, I'll be going into like a little more detail than this, but this is just so you guys can kind of get a head start if you're struggling with the homework. So if you want to write down these equations, you can if you want. If you want to follow along on a piece of paper, that's probably a good idea. But I will show you like how to go through a problem like this. So the problem says you have 26 million in capital, you have 17 million in common stock, 6 million in a loan, and that's at 11%, and a 3 million loan at 9.2%. Your 3-month T-bill is 2.4%, your market risk is 13%, you have a beta of 1.31, and your tax rate is 21%. And you want to know what the weighted average cost of capital is. So at first glance, you might see like, oh, there's a lot of numbers and it might be a little intimidating, but it's actually like a lot easier than you think once you start doing them. So we're just going to break it down and go step by step on how you would approach it. So the first thing to do is to label out what you have. So you have 26 million in capital. That's going to end up being your total. Your capital is everything that you have. So now we look further. So we see that we have common stock. And then we see that we have a loan. And then we see that we have a second loan. And then this is going to be your total capital. So now we just adding numbers. So we see that in common stock, we have 17 million. And then in the loan, we have 6 million. And then our second loan is 3 million. So something that, like a tip or whatever, that I like to do is if you have many weighted average problems, instead of redoing the whole thing every time, make a structure that you can just change the numbers and then the calculations will automatically follow. So for example, for total capital, instead of typing in 26 million, because you know it adds up to that, do equals sum and then add the sum. So then, for example, if you have another problem and you have different numbers, it will automatically calculate this. And then for the further on, it will automatically change as well. So that's just like a little tip that I always use. So then the next thing that you're going to do is find your, I'm going to type it over here, find your weights. So your weights is essentially how much of your common stock makes up the total, how much of your first loan makes up the total, and how much of your third loan makes up the total. So to do this, I'm just writing out really good so you guys can like easily follow along. So you're going to be dividing by your total. So again, I do it this way to have every step clearly written out. You guys don't have to do it this way. But I lock the cell, so everything changes when I change this one cell, or when I change these, everything follows along. So now we're going to have equals, and then we're going to have the actual calculation in this cell. So again, the way I do it is you just reference each cell because it will automatically change. Now we don't want it in dollars, we want it in percentage. So now we can see that the common stock makes up over 65% of the total capital. Your first loan makes up 23% and your second loan makes 11%. So those are your weights. Now, the next step that you're going to do is find your value. That's going to be multiplied. But in order to do this, you have to use your two formulas that we mentioned over here, the KD and your KE. So we'll start with KE. So for cost of equity, referring back to what you know about the balance sheet, you have assets, and then you have your liabilities and you have your equity. So equity is something like common stock. Liabilities or debt is your loans. So that's how you know what equation to use. So for KE, it's going to be your common stock. Now to find the value, that's just going to be using CAPM. And you have all the given numbers. So for CAPM, it's going to be 2.4, plus your beta of 1.31 multiplied by 13% minus 2.4%. And if you guys have any questions like along the way, type them out in the chat, or if I'm going too fast, I can slow down a little bit. So then we solve this equation and you end up with 16.29%. So again, the way I do it is I reference this number right here. So then if I were to type a new CAPM equation, it automatically changes. Now we're going to look at the two loans to find their value. So for loans, it's your cost of debt. And we're going to be using the cost of debt equation, which is up here, your pre-tax yield times 1 minus your tax rate. So for this, we have 11%, and that's going to be multiplied by 1 minus 0.21. So for this, you're going to end up with 8.69%. So again, I just reference it. And now we're going to do the second loan, and you'll have 9.2% times 1 minus 0.21. Okay, and then for this one, you end up with 7.27%. All right, so now I'm at the step where I can solve it. So after you multiply your weights times your value, that's how you're going to find your weighted value or your weighted average. This is your final step. So this is just multiplying everything that we typed out. So you do weight times your value, and you fill it in for the other ones. And then the final one is just summing them. So you should end up with 13.49%. And that is your final answer. So that would be your weighted average cost of capital. So again, this is to get a head start on your homework. Hopefully it was kind of easy to follow along.